Hi everyone, welcome back. Dr. O here with a video for week 2 on engagement in the workplace with an emphasis on definition and measurement. This is obviously a huge topic, as we've already discovered, looking through the business of engagement. And I think one of the primary interests is captured in this quotation by Doug Conant, the former CEO of Campbell's Soup. The idea that winning in the marketplace requires winning in the workplace. And there's probably some great value in that. As we'll see, engagement is related to all kinds of work-based outcomes. I'm going to take you into a look at a few different ways that academics have looked at it, and at least one of them has had great influence on many, many other definitions and approaches to understanding workplace engagement. Now, we can see that this is actually a relatively recent phenomenon when it comes to academic studies. And around in the 1990s, there was only one publication in academic research that had the word engagement even in the title. And in the first decade of the century, we had about 90 publications, and since then we've had over 450 publications. So if it seems like a fairly hot topic, it's been that way for a while, and is still around, that's for sure. Now, this slide is going to try to draw our attention to the different ways people construe the phenomenon of engagement. And the idea here is not to pitch one specific, absolutely right way, but to say, if you're going to compare yourself to another company, you're going to look at the metrics that one group has versus another. Be sure to understand what they mean by engagement and how they've chosen to measure it. Otherwise, you might end up comparing apples and bowling balls or something. So 3 perspectives on engagement. The first, we have to start with Professor William Kahn. He wrote a definitive article that's cited and referenced by, many, many, many studies. In 1990, it was published in the Academy of Management Journal. And this is credited with introducing the word engagement into the field of management and to the field, especially academic management. And he called it this initially, the harnessing of organization members' selves to their work roles. In engagement, people employ and express themselves physically, cognitively, and emotionally during role performances. In other words, while they're doing their work. Notice the word harnessing. It's kind of unusual, but as I reflect on it, I think it means I'm choosing to attach myself, my real self, to my work activities, right? And I'm going to emphasize a few words in the rest of it here that people employ and express themselves. So there's a view, as Kahn saw it, of agency on the part of the employee. And it's choosing to employ and express themselves in these ways. They're expressing themselves physically, cognitively, and emotionally while they're at work, taking up their roles. So they're employing and expressing themselves. So Kahn was looking at when it happens. It's not all, I think, that came out of the study, but he chose to look in 2 different organizations. They're really quite different. One was an architectural firm, and the other was a camp where I believe he served as a tennis instructor at the camp. And he used an approach that's called grounded theory development. He didn't have hypotheses to test, and he didn't have one theory base that was going to completely explain everything before he got there, I'd say. He was drawing on a number of perspectives, but he kind of sat in these organizations and saw what went on and observed and interviewed people just to try to put together from this grounded approach, saying what I'm actually seeing and hearing, and I'm going to say, is there some pattern to this? And indeed there was. And he said, these are the table setters, is what I'll call them, for engagement. There has to be meaningfulness of the work. There has to be a good degree of psychological safety that it's okay to bring myself into the workplace without getting cut off or being penalized for risk, that's reasonable risk. And availability. Do I have the psychological, emotional, physical resources to do this, to bring myself, and am I choosing to bring my whole self, or a good chunk of it, I guess we could say, into the workplace? So availability even points a bit to agency once again. Now, again, he didn't have a survey. Since that time, some years later, some researchers kind of, as they say, operationalized or found ways to measure his concepts. And I'll link that study and the end of the materials for this week, for this week's content, though it's not required to read it. I did link the article by Bill Kahn, the 1990 piece about the psychological conditions for engagement. And if you can, I'd encourage you to read at least parts of that. It gives you a feeling for what he was doing as he was digging into these situations, really what he was trying to understand, and a bit of the theoretical framework and general understanding that he brought to the work. And he was interviewed in 2015, some 25 years after the famous publication, which, by the way, I don't think took off right away. As you see, his was the only publication with that name in it for 10 years. And it started to gain traction the next decade. And then following that is when it really caught on. So he wasn't immediately famous by any means by publishing this. Actually, I knew him a bit. I had him as a professor at Boston University in my doctoral program, and worked for him a little bit on a consulting study he did, but I had nothing to do with his famous research at all. But he said, looking back, is this still relevant? I guess we could say 25 years later. And he answered this way: the problems of giving people voice over what they do and how they do it, of ensuring that people find their work intrinsically meaningful and enabling them to craft their roles. These problems still exist. And here's part of his viewpoint on this: as managers wish to exert control over others when they are made anxious by the demands to produce and perform. So he's seeing that there is a challenge to set things up so that people can give voice and craft their roles. And when pressure comes on for managers to perform, that might make them just more controlling than might be optimal. So he sees this all as a system. And here's another viewpoint that I saw recently called the European view. Vilmar Scheffeli and others worked on a different way of construing and measuring workplace engagement. And they actually came at it, as I understand, like the flip side of burnout. There was a lot of study on burnout, and going after an understanding of what's the opposite of burnout, and this became engagement. And they say it's a positive, fulfilling, work-related state of mind that's characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption. Those are the three big dimensions: vigor, dedication, and absorption. Am I bringing myself physically in a vigorous way? Am I focused on this? And am I absorbed in the work? Right? And they've, I'll link a study that includes their measurement approach. It'll be a pretty academic-y paper, but again, I encourage you to take a look at it. But certainly do try to dig into the Bill Kahn piece. But I'll give you a couple of other papers where other measures are utilized. In this one, 3 dimensions can be used to look at this construct that's opposite of burnout, we might say. And this is a super shrunk down survey measure that I'm actually using in a study that I'm working on getting into the field right now. And just 3 questions measuring it. And actually it started with, I believe, 25 questions. Then it became a 17-item measure that was used quite widely, I believe, and then it became a 9-item measure. Then not too long ago, 2019, they were working to say, how few questions can we use to capture this phenomenon? And this is what it ended up with. At my work, I feel bursting with energy. I am enthusiastic about my job, and I am immersed in my work. 1 strongly disagrees, 7 agree strongly. You might think about that for yourself, right where you are, the job you have now, or maybe you think of a job you recently had. How would you answer these 3 questions? Respond to these 3 items, 1 to 7. Then I'd encourage you to think about perhaps others in your work group who you're working with now or you worked with in the recent past. How do you think they'd score this measure on those 3 dimensions? And why would that be the case? So it's a very reduced, short form measure of engagement, and you might want to kind of play with that a bit and see your self-estimate and what you think others would might respond. You might casually ask some people about that in your workplace if that is something you feel comfortable to do. Here's perhaps the most famous and general public discussion of engagement. This is probably the most famous reporter of statistics is the Gallup organization. They say engagement happens when employees are involved in, enthusiastic about, and committed to their work and workplace. Commitment is part of what they're measuring. And there's a famous scale they use. They have it copywritten, so that's why I put it right here. It's not really considered good form to take their survey and run it without their permission. But there's 12 items, and you can find them all on the web anyways. I'm not giving any secret information. And these are the items. And just think about what is it that's being measured in this famous Gallup survey, and how does it differ from measuring vigor and dedication and so forth. Okay, question 1. I know what's expected of me at work. I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. In the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. There is someone at work who encourages my development. At work, my opinions seem to count. The mission or purpose of my organization makes me feel my job is important. My associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. I have a best friend at work. In the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. And this last year, I've had opportunities to learn and to grow. So what do you think is being measured there? You might think about that and see how much is self-reporting of activity and self-reporting of engagement, reporting of conditions or facilitators of engagement. Interesting to consider that. But this would likely be the poll that you've seen in the paper or heard in the news that whatever the exact number is right now, say 1/3 of US employees are engaged and a chunk are actively disengaged and a bunch are kind of maybe in the middle. That's the kind of statistic that we see quite often. So I hope this little bit of a look at different ways of thinking about and measuring the phenomenon of engagement will just be another way that you can be engaged in your studies about this topic. As I noted, I already attached the Bill Kahn piece. I'm going to put 2 others on as optional reading if you just like to peruse them and understand more about where the concept took shape with Kahn and then some ways others measure this phenomenon. So it's been good sharing these ideas with you, and I'll look forward to interacting with you soon. Have a good one. Take care.